and welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Tri-Delta. I'm your host, Elizabeth DiMartino, and I serve as Tri-Delta's Chief Engagement Officer. I am also Tri-Delta's most immediate past president and joined Tri-Delta at our Alpha chapter at Boston University. Before joining Tri-Delta's staff this fall, I have served for more than 25 years as a Tri-Delta volunteer. And of all the amazing experiences that I have had, I think today ranks as one of the highlights of my Tri-Delta experience. I cannot wait to dig in and take you with me on this fun conversation that we're about to have. Throughout the month of November in Tri-Delta, we like to celebrate our sisterhood and the legacy of our founders. And that's why today I'm thrilled to be joined by one of Tri-Delta's most inspiring leaders, Sara Sash Vaughn Gabbard from our Delta Pi chapter at the University of Illinois. Sash was initiated in 1955 and served as Tri-Delta's Fraternity President from 1980 to 1984. Sash's leadership, warmth, and deep love for Tri-Delta for more than 70 years has left a lasting impact on our sisterhood and on many of us. I have had the opportunity to meet Sash and spend time with her in person, and I can tell you that we are in for a treat today. We're so lucky to have her here with us today on the podcast to share her insights and her wisdom. And this platform is going to allow us to have such a wide reach than was ever possible than when she was president. So Sash, welcome. It is an honor to have you here with us today.
Thank you.
This is a continuation of just so much fun I've had getting to know you over the last year and a half or so personally. And I love hearing the stories that you have about your Tri-Delta experience, not only in serving as a leader, but also about your experiences in Tri-Delta, even back to your early collegiate days. You joined Tri-Delta back in 1955 at the University of Illinois. And I would love for our listeners to hear your experiences in college life. What was it like back then? And what do you most remember about your experiences in Tri-Delta during those days?
Well, I came from a high school graduating class of 112. And at the time, the University of Illinois had 22,000 students. I'm sure it's double that by now. So I probably wouldn't have fared very well if I had not had the Tri-Delta support. In that day, the University of Illinois had every single national fraternity and sorority. So Greeks were a big thing. Women had Rush Week in June, right after high school graduation. And then at least with my group, all of the active members were asked to contact every pledge with letters during the summer. And we even had some get-togethers for sleepovers and that sort of thing. So by the time I arrived at the chapter house in September, I had met at least by letter every single member of the chapter. So that made me feel a lot safer and more secure at facing the University of Illinois. And I was a little bit afraid of getting out of the car when my parents pulled up to the house. But as was the custom, which I did not know about, the fraternity guys from Theta Chi across the street unloaded luggage and everything for every new pledge. So instead of crying when I saw these guys in their white buck shoes, by the way, that was big back then, I just kind of turned to my mom and dad and said goodbye and went on the way. So it just was a marvelous experience. Now, as pledges, we had hours when we had to be, but then so did all women students. Pledges we were required to study from 7 until 10 on weeknights. But there was a 10:30 curfew for all women students. And there was a weekend curfew. I know Sunday night was 11 for women. And I think Friday and Saturday nights, we could stay up and out until 1. So it was just an entirely different experience. But that was okay because we weren't exactly looking forward to challenges. And I know that the freshman registration for classes was in the huge armory that they used for ROTC drilling. And it was awful scary because it was so huge and so loud. And we weren't allowed to be accompanied by Tri Delta older gals, but my pledge mother was standing right outside the door, and I took some comfort from the fact that she was there. But it was so confusing when I saw a sign that said PEM, and I thought it meant physical education in the morning. So I stood in a long row to sign up for PE in the morning. And of course, it turned out to be PE for men. And so I had to find another long line to stand in. But as I say, our study hours, we were kept under pretty close control.
Yeah, absolutely. That does sound like things have changed a little.
Yeah, I was going to say that probably wouldn't go over very well today, but times change, and that's okay.
That's right. And I know that
change isn't good or bad, it's just change.
That's
so
right.
My collegiate experience was completely different from not only the members today, but also the 60s, just 10 years after I was initiated. That was a whole different Greek experience. And I was a district president at the end of the 60s. So the chapter visits and that sort of thing, the members had a little bit of a different outlook on freedom and complying with everything. But they were, I think, probably some of our members who were initiated in the 60s were probably better members, braver members, certainly, than those of us in the 50s, because it was in to be in a sorority in the 50s. And it took quite a bit of courage on some campuses. Now, not all of them, of course. So it was kind of a changing of the guard in that respect.
Sure. And even in that 10 years,
yes,
that would have changed.
Yeah.
Talk to me about, even as we think about Tri Delta moving and existing through periods of change, our values continue to be timeless. Thinking back to your Tri Delta experience, what was it that drew you to Tri Delta? What, those foundational memories of being a collegiate member and beginning to understand this thing that you are now part of that was much larger than just your one chapter existence.
Well, truth be told, which I assume you want that, my
Sure.
mom and her sister were both Tri Deltas at Illinois.
Wonderful.
So I had even been in the chapter house. My mom and dad had seasonal football tickets. And when the weather got bad in November, my mom would very graciously allow me to go with Dad and use her ticket to go to the game. And he and I went by on rare occasions. Usually we went to his Sigma Chi house, and you can imagine, for greasy chili, that was what they served before football games. And you can imagine a kind of awkward, frightened high school student going in to the Sigma Chi house for lunch. And I certainly remember that. I remember the people most of all. Mm-hmm. And we built an addition when I was a sophomore, and it almost doubled the size of our chapter. Mm. But there was it was supposed to be completed over the summer, and there was a steel strike that summer. And so the chapter house was not completed. And as I told you, we rushed in June. Mm-hmm. So we had all of these pledges coming in where there was no room. So 2 girl rooms became 3 girl. 3 girl rooms became 4. And that was a little bit dicey, and we didn't get the house back until the end of that first semester. And there was a gaping hole in the back of it for all those months. And that was a little unsettling. Mm-hmm. But, it was okay because we loved each other, and nobody complained. We just did what had to be done to house those girls.
You were all in it together.
Yeah.
Let's pivot a little bit and talk about your leadership journey. I know from our records that in 1958, you received Tri Delta's Leadership Award, which is now, of course, called the Sarah Ida Shaw Award, which is given annually to a graduating senior. And you served as a graduate counselor right after graduation for Tri Delta, which is a program we no longer have, but did have for many years. And then you went on to serve the fraternity in so many ways, of course, most notably as our fraternity president, but also as collegiate vice president, foundation secretary, a membership director, an associate director. And when you think back on all of those experiences, where did your leadership journey start? Was it in those early chapter days? And what got you excited about being a leader and stepping into service?
I'm afraid I really didn't think that through. I want to be a leader or anything. It just kind of happened. I think I was chapter president because that year that I pledged, we had a very small pledge class. So it wasn't as if I planned on anything or defeated others or that sort of thing. It just kind of happened. I think I was house manager, which that job, you dealt with the kitchen and the house mother and that sort of thing. So that wasn't a whole lot of fun, but it was just what it was. And I think with the leadership award, all the chapters nominated somebody each year, and it had nothing to do with me. It had to do, there was a committee of about 5 or 6 who wrote the letters for me, why they nominated me. And they sat in the living room every night at 10:30 after the house closed, and you could hear them howling with laughter. So, and I never saw what they submitted, but I just have to think that what they did was the reason. And the convention that year was in Miami Beach, and our alumna advisor, two other chapter members, and I drove from Illinois to Miami Beach in our alumna advisor's elderly Buick. It was one of the first cars to have air conditioning. And we frequently had to get out and pour water over the engine and the three collegians, we took turns driving so that Mrs. Osborne never had to. And we stopped on the way down at historical places. The others disagreed with me on the value of this, but we went to Shiloh and Chickamauga, and I still remember we went to Andersonville, the prison camp for Northern soldiers in the Civil War. And we went right before noon, and the only time on the trip we skipped lunch because it had made such an impact on us to see Andersonville. Now, why I remember that, I don't know. You know, the elderly mind is a wonder to behold sometimes. But that was the best trip, and we had a little bit of a different viewpoint, perhaps, of the national officers than when I was on the board. Mrs. Haller, I still can't call her Margaret. I call the ones I knew in college, I was never able to call by their first names.
I understand that very much.
So Mrs. Haller was our goddess, I guess. And Mrs. Rudolph was the editor of the Trident at the time. Mrs. Moles was there. So I remember all of these women who just, you know, they'd walk across the room. I remember seeing Mrs. Kennard. She didn't come to many things. And she was president in the mid to late 40s, I think. And she was always a hero of mine. And once I saw her walk across a hotel lobby where we were having a convention, and you just knew, you know, whether you were a Tri-Delta or not, you just knew that she had it together. So I don't think people had that same kind of hero worship or heroine worship, if you prefer, much after my experience as a collegian. I don't know, but I think there was kind of a change in attitude.
But something there ignited in you. You stayed involved. You started volunteering and serving. Do you remember what that was? Was it someone asking, "Hey, we have a need," or did you say, "I'd love to do that"? What was the genesis there for you?
When I first started, now this was back in the day when the guys had to serve in the military. So Bill and I got married, and we spent the first 3 years of our married life on a Navy base in Spain. So, and I actually had Tri-Delta stickers in this awful old car of his. And I met two who saw it on the base, and met a couple of other men, but I didn't. I you know I had no leadership, and as the wife of an ensign, you kind of hid behind the ferns as much as possible. Then when we came back, we moved to Rockford, Illinois, and they had a very small alumni chapter, but I think maybe we had founders stay together.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't until I moved to St. Louis and was taken in by that alumni chapter, that's what really made me think, I need to be part of this. I need to give back, and that sort of thing. And they picked me up for meetings when I didn't know. St. Louis is a large area, and they did. And so one day, Lorraine Whitehead was the district president, and she decided to retire. And she took the files. Another gal had said she would do it. We had basically the 3 chapters in Missouri. This other gal agreed to do it. Lorraine showed up at her house with the district president's files in her trunk, opened the trunk, and the gal said, "Forget that." So I mean, she was real active in politics and a lot of things. She said, "I can't do that." So I sort of started my national volunteer thing as secondhand Rose, I guess I would be, because the gal who was supposed to be district president said no.
Well, I don't think you're secondhand Rose, but how fortunate for us.
And it was the St. Louis alumni chapter. And in fact, they kept me on, and I paid dues long after Bill and I moved from St. Louis to Indiana. Mm-hmm. And and I'm still in touch with an awful lot of them.
That's wonderful.
That's you got to realize at my age, the ranks are thinning, but it's St. Louis.
Mm-hmm. That's where it sounds like where it started, really moving into fraternity leadership. And of course that culminated in the early 80s when you were president from 80 to 84. And there was a lot going on in the world. I know you love history. That was a time marked with lots of change of its own, the Cold War, and kind of the genesis of some technology and innovation. Computers began to make their way. And I love hearing, I've heard them from you before, some of your stories about those early days, thinking about how we served our office and our staff and what that looked like.
Going tech. Well, Mary Kay Baker was president. I was membership director. So this would have been sometime between 74 and 76. And we decided as a board that we needed to update from typewriters and things. So the executive office staff at that time was dear Lou Smith and 7 others. So we told Lou to buy a word processor. We'd heard that word, and we knew we needed something. And so we went to Dallas, Arlington for a board meeting, and Lou was so proud, and she took the 5 of us into this office. There was an enormous box-like thing sitting by itself on a table, and that was our Tri-Delta's first word processor. Now, we had no idea what it should be used for or anything. We just, but remember, we didn't have cell phones or emails or anything like that. So that obviously has grown into a huge part of running, as you know, running the fraternity. And I have no experience whatsoever in the fact that I had to have my daughter and grandson set up this podcast shows you where I am with technology. But it grew, and at some point in time, those of you who understand these things took over the leadership, and I'm baffled by it, but very proud of the fact that some of you know what to do, because without it, you just can't be around today. But I know that the 5 board members with all of the boards I was on, we very rarely spoke to each other because phone calls were so expensive. Mm-hmm. And I remember in my 10 years, I think there were maybe 3 or 4 group calls with the 5 members. And I remember Pass from Lubbock, Texas, knew how to set it up. So she was our guru. And I think that one of them was over a really startling thing. And then my recollection is that the others were before a convention when a few things had to be ironed out. So we just weren't very savvy. And
so was most of your correspondence through mail? You were mailing things back and forth?
It was all mail.
Yeah.
And we had these awful, you had to make the original in 6 copies. Mm-hmm. And there were these carbon sets that were at the top, they were to get, and each board member had a different color. And so you had to, and we did have electric typewriters, but in order to get through to the 7th, maybe the 6th and 7th page, you just had to wind up and hit the keys. Really. In fact, I had to have elbow surgery the year after I left the board. And the orthopedic surgeon said that my elbow looked like a curveball pitcher who didn't throw the ball correctly. And it was slapping those things down.
All that correspondence.
Oh, yeah, it was just all, yeah.
Yeah, and today we can just shoot a text off and it takes no time at all.
Well, that is correct. So I would say that the communications is a huge plus from what we had.
Sure. Outside of technology, are there any other, big priorities or changes that come to mind during that era for you as you were thinking about fraternity leadership?
Now, we had pretty well gotten through the racial question on pledges, because we didn't have a lot of Black members, but we did have some Black members. And I know that it was at a major university. Maybe I should give them a break and not say, I got a phone call at supper time from a student reporter from this university. And what I had to do in the kitchen They didn't even have the thing where you could walk around, but I had this enormously long cord so that I could get all the way around and I got a phone call. I was fixing supper, and it was from a student reporter, and he said, Tridelt just pledged the first Black woman on the campus. What are you going to do about it? Mm-hmm. And I said, I'm going to wish her well, as I do with all pledges, and hope that she makes her grades. There were some uncomfortable moments, and but we just kept on trucking, we still, so.
Well, lots of lessons learned, hard decisions made, I know, during that.
Life, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And I do remember we didn't have anything even remotely comparable to the fundraising efforts today. I was collegiate vice president, and we decided to have a national mailing asking for money. We called it the Loyalty Fund. Well, we still just had that one word processor, and we had no idea. So we had to hire fundraisers, a fundraising firm. I think they were in St. Louis. And I mean, you had to compile the names, print and distribute the request, return on, I mean, it cost us $28,000. And we were terrified that we wouldn't cover the costs.
Mm-hmm.
Because this was new.
Yeah.
And it turns out we took in $32,000. So we made a grand profit of $4,000, and we were just kind of, look at us. And so, and of course, we didn't have a single national philanthropy the way St. Jude's is now. Right. So it was just a different thing. And now each chapter had fundraising things. I remember I had grown up with a St. Bernard at home, and the fraternity Theta Chi across the street from us had a St. Bernard named Ox, and we had a raffle off raffling our service. Well, you wouldn't have called them services, but we did chores and stuff. The Theta Chi's put in a whole lot of money for one of the Tridelts to wash ox. And since I had they put me in the shower in the chapter house with this dog. Goodness. So we did a lot of things like that.
Yeah.
And we always gave scholarships and the service projects, I think, wasn't that what it was called, the scholarships?
Sure.
But we just had nothing comparable to what you all have built with St. Jude's.
Yeah, it is remarkable. It really is. When you think about the scale of that. I'm going to pull us back to, I know you are a student of history, and I think we share a love of history. And I have spent some time in our foundational documents and in our archives, and I know you have likely as well. And I'm always struck by when I look at those early documents and I see the words of our founders. Sara said, we're going to found a society that'll be kind alike to all thinking more of a girl's inner self and her character than her personal appearance. And to me, we really have this idea of belonging, inclusion, kindness to others really baked in. And I would just love to hear, when you think about those early words, what that means to you, how that resonates. And as we think about what it means from your, starting in the 50s as a collegiate member to where you are today, does that still feel so relevant to you?
Well, I think one of the problems with the world today is that those words aren't relevant to many people who kind of think that that's silly or that's childish or that sort of thing. And somebody asked me at church not too long ago. I don't know why it came up. They were asking who had been in a sorority and who had in a book group. And so I said, yeah. And they said, well, I was too, but I'm not into that kind of nonsense anymore. And I fear that some people still feel that, but those lessons, those mottos, I mean, they're good for all time, whether you go back to the founders or go to today. And I think that there is a tendency to overlook that sort of bond that can, and the importance of it. But there are those of us who still treasure the lessons learned, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with having mottos or any kind of symbolism that will bring you back and remind you of the things that are important to you. I think that for those of us who were bitten by the bug, I think that we can just hold on to that. I know that I usually I gave 2 convention keynotes and 2 leadership school keynotes. And I always worked in kind of like and something from the rituals. Okay. I just always did that because I think we all need things to cling to. I know I do, and I think there are many who do. And there are lots of things from what we learned as kids or as teenagers, as young adults, and there were some lessons learned. They still apply today. And I just think that by focusing on these words, it's just for me, it's necessary to keep an even keel, I guess, would be. And remind me how to treat others and
yeah, that's right.
Bond and go ahead.
I found a letter that you wrote in 1988. You must have been just finishing up your term as your second term as president, and you noted in the letter that when you were in the chapter, you did things for the house. That it was I had to do these things for the
FTH, right? We called it for the house.
For the house, FTH. And then you later reflected that while these things were for the house, they benefited you
Right.
personally, and you learned these lessons. That's what when you're saying this, it's reminding me of what you wrote. And I have the same experience. You do something because it feels like you need to at the time, and what you don't always see is that you've benefited greatly as a leader, as a sister, as a friend, as a human from these experiences.
I'd forgotten the FTH. Yeah.
For the house. Well, I love your nod back to our symbolism and how it reminds us of our ideals and our values, and this call to be kind to all. I think it's important, especially as we think about Founders Day, and we're heading into a season of that as we move into November.
I even noticed crescent moons still.
Same.
In fact,
Right.
my Becky, my daughter, is a Pi-Phi, and I remember one of their field reps was staying with us once, and Gene Scott was the national president of Pi-Phi at the time, and Becky's friend, the field rep, we were outside, and she called Gene Scott, and she said, "Mrs. Gabbard is making me admire the crescent moon. Can you do anything about that?" And Gene Scott said, "No, that's just what she is." And then Gene came to a convention, I believe, and told that story that my Pi-Phi daughter and her field rep were upset about being forced to admire a crescent moon.
And I know you have your pansy on your shirt today, which I love. You're special.
This shirt, Kathy Ford, membership director, as I said, one of the responsibilities was Rush. And this, when I was elected membership director in 1974, Kathy Ford of Lubbock, Texas, was National Rush chairman. Yeah. And she told me that I must come to Lubbock to learn bumper rotation.
Yes.
I don't know if anybody knows what bumper.
I do, and I think many people listening will know. Yes, and we used to call it Texas Tech in my chapter.
Bumper rotation in the 50. Yeah, but you didn't do it right. So I went to Lubbock, and she made this shirt for me. It has the deltas on the back, the pansies on the front, the my name Sash, and it even has my Delta Pi. And she sent this to me.
Love that.
This has to be 50 years old.
I love this. This is great. It needs to be in our archives someday, Sash, so we can all admire the beautiful symbolism.
Clothes that are probably, but that Kathy was just the bumper rotation. She was going to show the new membership director how to do that.
I love that. What a great memory. Well, any words of wisdom to leave us with as you think about those of us that are carrying the torch forward for Tri Delta? What is your hope for the future of Tri Delta and for our organization, and thinking about your long legacy of leadership and service? What is it that you're hoping for as we head into our Founders Day season?
You know what? I wish the joy of friendship to all of you, both the leaders and the members, because without that, it's a whole lot of work. It's still a whole lot of work, but that word joy is, to me, in fact, I may have given a talk once on the word joy, probably did, but it's not happy. It goes so far beyond. So I wish all of you the joy of friendship.
Thank you, Sash. And right back at you. We wish it back for you. And we're so grateful for your service, for the legacy that you've given us of modeling true lifetime membership and service to the fraternity. So thank you for spending some time with me today. This has been a joy. Just was delighted thinking about this conversation all day today.
Take care and lead us where we need to be led.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, to all of our Tri Delta listeners, happy Founders Day. We hope that you have enjoyed celebrating this special day with sisters near and far, from alumni chapter gatherings to connections online. And as we reflect on our sisterhood and the legacy of our founders, I hope you'll take a moment to read the Founders Day proclamation from our current president, Libby Hogan Leffler from California at Berkeley, which is now available on the Trident online at tridelta.org/the-trident. Please like, subscribe, and rate our podcast. We love 5-star ratings from you, and thanks for joining us. Until next time, Delta love from all of us.